Hi guys, and welcome back to the podcast. Today we have a very interesting guest on. We have Dr. Catherine Kelly. Dr. Kelly is an author of Blue Spaces and a lecturer in Brighton University at the moment. Thanks a million for jumping on.
Pleasure, Robbie. Nice to be on and talking to you. Yep.
Do you want to give a little introduction of, I suppose, what you're working on at the minute, what your interests are?
Yeah. Well, as you said, I'm a lecturer at the University of Brighton in the UK. You can tell from my accent I am Irish, so I'm originally from Wicklow, and I'm a geographer by trade originally, so which is a nice, useful thing. My PhD was in human geography, gosh, over 20 years ago, and I went on and I retrained about 10, 15 years ago in stress management. So I had a real interest in well-being. So for me, the kind of relationship between geography, landscape, nature, water, and our well-being suddenly just started to dovetail the further along my career I got. So that's kind of where I'm sitting at the moment. And as luck would have it, I think the world has gradually started to realize that, you know, being outside and being in the water in particular is actually really good for us, which was lucky for me because I always felt that.
Yeah.
I was there kind of ahead of the posse, and now I'm sort of just in the right sweet spot of everybody realizing it. And suddenly the book that I wrote, Blue Spaces, How and Why Water Can Make You Feel Better, and the research interests I have and various policy work I'm doing over here, all seems to have just come together all at once. So that's really interesting and exciting to just be literally at the crest of the wave, deliberate pun, of this work. And honestly, it's my real sort of passion and soul work as well, you know. So it's not just a boring academic dreaming up something to write a paper about, you know, to get the managers off your back.
That's it.
So,
Lovely. And what
yeah.
kind of led you down the path, I guess, of looking at Blue Spaces? What brought you to that point?
Well, it was, you know, if you ask anybody who likes the sea, they'll say, well, I always liked the sea.
Yeah.
And I think most of us who do have an affinity with it would automatically say that. I didn't grow up next to water, but I suppose the thing that, and I write about this in the opening part of my book, the thing that really made me connect water with well-being was the very sudden death of my mum when she was 47. I was talking to her one night. I had my first lecturing job in London, and I was talking to her, you know, the usual emigrant story where you ring home, how's it going? I have a bit of a chat about the weather, which seemingly was very hot. And she had a headache, and you know, we moved quickly on to other news and other things. And then the very next morning, I got a call to say that she had died.
Gee, I'm
And
sorry
it was it was a long time ago now, you know. But yeah, she was young. She was 47. And had nothing wrong with her other, you know, it was just so bold from the blue. And it really, you know, knocked me and everybody sideways because she was, you know, one of those special people that sort of quietly drew everybody around her and all of that. And yeah, I left my job in London. I came back. We had a family business in Ireland. I had a younger sister in college in Dublin, and yeah, came back and I sort of did fixing up work on us all for about 9 or 10 months. And then this lovely job came up in the west of Ireland in Mayo to run a heritage studies degree, which was kind of nature orientated. So environmental studies, geology, geography, kind of natural heritage. So, and I had never been in Mayo before I went for the interview for that job. Just hadn't crossed my path for whatever reason. Galway and Clare lots of times, but not Mayo. And the day before when I went for the interview, I just arrived in Westport and I went for a walk out on the beach near Croagh Patrick, and the wind was blowing and the sea was blue, and I thought, this is the place for me. Um, and I just thought, yeah, and it was the perfect job as well. You know, it was everything that I loved. And also that my mum had loved actually about nature. We had a crafts business that on a at home that was built on wildflowers and wild grasses that my mum had planted up a nature trail. I mean, this is back in the early 90s, you know. So she was well ahead of her time on environment and conservation and natural heritage as well. So it was the perfect job in the perfect place. And I stayed there for 6 years, and I just let the Atlantic blow my head off and clear the wound of grief and let it heal. You know, I walked, you know, I lived at Old Head, just beyond Westport, near Lewisburg. I had a little house there, and that was a beautiful 3 mile long white strand with the reek in the backdrop. And, you know, it cured me really. And it wasn't something that I was kind of conscious of either. So I think that's a lot of where this work comes from. And I've had a lot of feedback about that on my book. It's like, oh yeah, so you put into words what I didn't know I knew. And that's kind of where it came. And that was a very instinctive and intuitive draw to the water at that time of pain and grief. And, you know, I often say, I've said before on other podcasts, that grief is very much like a wound that needs to be cleaned. And if you let air and water into it, it will gradually heal, you know. So that was kind of what happened over time. And I didn't, you know, the people I worked with or lived with wouldn't necessarily have known the sad story, because I didn't want to be sort of going around with that label. And also it was too much as well. I just needed time and water and the wind in the west of Ireland, I'm sure many of us are familiar with, to blow the cobwebs away. Yeah.
It definitely does. It definitely does. The wildness of it does, I guess, break you down a small bit in terms of like just getting out there. And for me, it's a huge thing as well, as just being by it, but getting into it as much as possible. I think is a huge part of it. Was the same? Did you find it? Were you getting similar benefits from just like being around it, just walking, being there in the wildness of it, or was there an aspect of you that always wanted to be inside, immersed in it as well?
At that time, it was enough for me actually to be next to it and just to let, you know, I mean, let's face it, the west of Ireland weather is fairly immersive.
Yeah.
It's not a gentle stroll in a you know,
I know it well.
In a gentle breeze. It's fairly, you know, interactive, shall we say. Lean into it, whether it's the rain or the wind. And that's kind of was enough for me in those early stages, was to just be next to it. And obviously over the years, I got into surfing and cold water swimming and all of those things really, you know, combine. I talk in the book about blue spaces being next to them, in them, on them, under them, you know. And I think all of them bring different benefits. And that's why, you know, it's such a wonderful space, because we're all of different ages, different abilities, different needs, different moods, and being in, next to, on or under brings us benefits in their own ways, you know. And I only started cold water swimming about 5 years ago, just here in Brighton. And I wouldn't believe it after COVID when my friends in Ireland told me that everybody was getting in the sea now. And I just thought, gosh, I lived in Mayo for 6 years. I never saw anybody in the sea except in August, you know, shivering and blue. So I think it's great that it's taken off so much.
Yeah, it's like something I've always loved. Surfing, I suppose, is a way of getting there. But I think there's definitely a huge part to surfing of just being there. Like the amount of times I went out, I wouldn't class myself as a good surfer by any means, but just being out there and kind of just sitting outside the break.
Peaceful, isn't it? Yeah.
It's peaceful. Yeah. You get as much from it, especially if you're ever around Fanor, any of those places where you kind of looking back on the land or on the landscape. I think you get so much from that as well.
Yeah. We go to Cornwall and Portugal quite a bit. Yeah. I mean,
lovely.
there is occasionally some surf in Brighton, but it's It's urban coast, so I don't really enjoy surfing in Brighton. I have to say, I don't really like looking at an industrial estate behind me.
Yeah. I
I'd
guess so.
rather look at the Burren or,
And
you know,
I've
yeah.
I've heard you mention as well, and looking through some of your research, the idea of a therapeutic landscape.
Mm,
What,
nice phrase, that one, isn't it?
lovely
That
one.
was a that was a term coined by an American sociologist called Will Gessler. Originally started, he used therapeutic landscapes in his research on places like Lourdes and that sort of kind of healing places. But yeah, it's a phrase now that a lot of social scientists use just basically to describe places that make us feel better. So I think blue spaces are definitely therapeutic landscapes, um, for so many reasons, you know. They're good. And they're sensory landscapes, which is a phrase that I like to use, you know.
What do you mean?
You Well, they just, when all your senses are engaged, it increases your well-being, because when our senses are engaged, it takes our focus away from our brain, our thinking brain, because we operate, like a toddler almost, that touches everything and has to taste everything
Yeah.
and, explores through the senses. It's very, because their frontal lobes of their brains aren't massively developed yet at that point. So you learn through that, and it's a very bodily experience. So when we're in or near water, we look at the motion of it. We look at, what it's doing, whether it's a river or the sea, a calm sea or a crashing sea. And even as I'm talking, you might be able to imagine different types of movement of water that you enjoy, and maybe how they mirror your mood, help it or reflect it. The color of the water, depending on the color of the sky, the time of the year, the light on, if you think about it, I can look at the sea down the road from me here in Brighton, and if I look at a photograph, I know what time of day it is because of what the light is doing on the water. And I'll probably be able to tell what season it is as well because of the depth of the light. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yeah, the sound of it as well, that engages our auditory senses. The smell of it, if you smell seaweed or even fresh water, even going out on the road after a big rain shower,
Yeah.
that smell of water and earth together brings you straight into your senses. Yeah, and the touch of it, if you're in it, the cold, the warm, the saltiness, the freshness, the surprise of going from air to water that on your skin, that invokes a respiratory response where you go, or ooh, or whatever it might be. It's impossible to get into water, I think, without making a noise in response to it.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
So that's what I mean by a sensory landscape. And water has all of those senses that maybe other spaces don't, which is why I love green spaces too. But research shows us that blue spaces are humans' preferred environment. So that's really interesting.
Really, yeah.
Yeah.
I never
Yeah.
even, because when you say that, like as you talk about it, it is completely a sensory experience in that, and I've never put those two together in that. I suppose it does take you away from like when you go into cold water, there is nothing else that you think about as opposed to how
No, you're
cold it
in
is.
your body. Yeah. And you're concentrating on your breathing, which immediately cuts all of that kind of mental processing stuff, because well, if it's very cold, you're in survival mode, quite frankly, where you're regulating your heartbeat and your breath to adapt to the environment you're in. You're not thinking about, the minutes of yesterday's meeting
Yeah,
or whatever it might be.
exactly.
So,
Yeah, exactly. It's the last thing that you think about. You don't think about anything that's ahead of you or behind or it's gone past.
no,
Either.
it's very, very mindful. And my book is essentially a mindfulness in water book, really, which is because water brings you into the present moment in a way that where you don't even have to try at it. You're immediately drawn to it. It's not like learning to meditate where you're kind of scrunching up your eyes and really analyzing your breath to see are you doing it properly.
Mm.
Water just allows you to be instantly mindful effortlessly, which is what's so wonderful about it, and which is why it makes us feel better.
And you describe blue spaces, I suppose, when a lot of people think about it, I guess they often think of like the sea, the Atlantic,
Yeah.
Pacific, stuff like that. But it's
Mhm.
not only that, it's been around water in any
Yeah,
capacity, lakes, fountains, even.
absolutely. All of those. We're very privileged, maybe those of us listening who live near a coast, because that's something that's very expansive. And, we often choose to live in a place that's by the coast on purpose because of it. But if you can't, yeah, lakes, rivers, streams, ponds, if you're in a city, canals, fountains, and even your own bath and shower, if we bring it back to the micro scale of the domestic, you know what I mean? You can go from the Atlantic to the shower, from the macro to the micro, because water brings you back into your body, no matter what scale we're talking about.
Yeah.
Try drink a glass of water without engaging your senses.
Yeah. It actually brings me back to the idea of the therapeutic landscape. Around us,
Mm.
there's a lot of holy wells. Like there's holy wells
Exactly.
for your
Yeah.
eyes, for anything, any type of ailments,
Traditions. Yes.
traditions, and that.
Yeah.
Is there any research on the benefit of holy wells, the idea of them, why they attract people, why they heal certain ailments? I
Yeah,
know.
there's a lovely book by Ronan Foley, who's at NUI Maynooth, and he writes about that sort of healing blue spaces from the sort of Celtic traditional perspective, which is all about the kind of superstitions and folklore beliefs around holy wells and all of that. I only touch on it briefly in my book because I wanted to kind of go more into the kind of practice and present. But yeah,
Hmm.
there's some really nice work by him on that kind of ritual of, and it's not just Ireland with its holy wells. We had one near us in where I grew up, where you had to go St. Moog's well if you had warts. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
I remember my grandmother making us go there. I think when you're in primary school, everybody gets them. I'm just thinking
Yeah.
this is absolutely crazy. I don't know what she's on. My
Um,
grandmother was quite eccentric though anyway. She was dandelion tonic and all
yeah.
kinds of nettle tea. So that was the least of it, going to the well.
It is an interesting concept. I remember hearing before now, and I don't know what the truth is behind it. Maybe you may be able to clear it up a small bit with the therapeutic landscapes, but there was something to do with the distance that you travel to one of these has an effect on or can affect the effectiveness of it. So if you travel to Lourdes from the States, or if you travel from
Oh, right.
Paris, I don't know if you ever came across that in terms of like
I
the distance that
didn't.
you travel
No.
has a bigger effect on the quality
Is
of.
it supposed to be better or worse the further you go?
I think it's supposed to be better the
Oh,
further you
okay.
go, because I suppose it comes back to the rituals, it comes back to the mindset of it, and what your
Pilgrimage.
expectation is.
Well, it's noted in that ancient tradition of pilgrimage, though, isn't it? Which is setting an intention to go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you can have a small mini pilgrimage. I think I always think of surfing and outdoor swimming in the winter as kind of a micro pilgrimage
Yeah, yeah, it is.
where you gather your stuff, and people say to me, how do you go into, like, it's been freezing in January here. It's been like minus several degrees and the sea is cold. I swam yesterday, it was 6.8 degrees, and people say, how do you go into it? And I just think, I walked the dog yesterday and I'm so cold. I'm like, it's really different from going for a walk or walking the dog, because then you're just out in the air walking around and you're kind of conscious of the cold. But when you set your intention to going into the sea, you kind of focus really on it, and you kind of tune out the rest of the environment, because your focus and your intention is on getting in and knowing, and really focus on the experience, anticipating the experience, then being in the experience. And if it's very cold, to be fair, getting dressed from the experience very quickly afterwards. But that moment before and in is very focused. And that is very much like I would, as you're talking about, which I hadn't thought before, but I think it's a good analogy, is that notion of pilgrimage, which is going somewhere for a purpose with the intention of healing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um, and traditional senses of that would have been about spiritual healing or religious healing, but maybe this is spiritual healing with a small s.
Yeah.
Because it makes us feel better, doesn't it?
That's it. When you mentioned there, when you said that idea of pilgrimage, it just brings me back to the idea of people going to Mayo specifically and
Oh
climbing
yes,
Kilpatrick
Week
in there.
Sunday. Oh God, many's the time I did it when I lived there.
Did you? Yeah, with the no
Uh,
shoes.
oh, not with no shoes. No,
Gee.
I'm not that hardcore. No, well, I lived at the foot of Patrick for 6 years, so um, yeah, and the view up there was amazing. It's top of the
Oh,
world, looking out over Clew Bay. Um, but yeah, I think that's a nice analogy actually. And there's so many water pilgrimage, rituals around the world. If you think of the Ganges and you know,
Ganges. I can't say I have.
people people in India bathing their dead in the river to release the spirit to the next world, and a lot of water rituals in Eastern cultures as well. The
Mm,
the Japanese onsen and the Turkish baths and the Romans, and if we think of all the kind of architecture and buildings and rituals around water, it's quite interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
There is a lot. I suppose, yeah, when you look at that now, you know a lot more than me about that, but there's so many different pilgrimages around it. Is it, I know I was looking into one of your research studies as well, and you talked about the idea of retreat,
Mm,
and the importance of
yeah,
retreat. And why do you feel it is?
absolutely.
Why do you feel
Yeah,
that?
I mean that was my original kind of research area before I sort of narrowed down into water, is kind of wellness retreats. I did work on wellness retreats sort of 19 years ago before they were a thing either. So um actually, to be fair, a colleague of mine, Melanie Smith at the University of Greenwich, where I was before, we both like doing yoga and going on retreats ourselves. So we decided this would be a very good research topic to get into. um so can you see a theme now of doing things that you like and then turning them into your research?
It's probably the best way, really, isn't it?
I guess a winner.
Yeah.
He would say to me, "Oh, you're so lucky that you do this." I'm like, "Oh, luck had nothing to do with it." Um, so yeah, retreat. I mean, I still think that's really good, and I'm actually hoping to try and run a Blue Spaces retreat in Mayo in the west of Ireland, probably September, October this year. So I'm just trying to drill down the details of that. But yeah, I've published several kind of book chapters and papers on the need to retreat. And it's something that I have practiced on a personal level for 15 years more, on a really regular basis. Um, it's just stopping. And I think water does this as well in a very sort of temporary way too. It just presses pause on your everyday life for a little while. And, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, well, you need 7 days to get the benefit, or you know what you need? You need as long as you've got, but you need to make the most of it,
Mm,
whether that's a 20-minute swim or a 10-minute bath or a weekend away at a prescribed retreat center. Or, as I do, every 3 months, I take a 24-hour personal retreat, lunchtime Saturday to lunchtime Sunday. I write about this in the book as well, where, Saturday morning you do all your family chores, all of that, and then I take off up the coast about an hour away from here. I book a little hotel. I bring my swimsuit and a candle and my journal. And I do it every 3 months before I reach tipping point. Um, and yeah, I just take time out and build my own retreat, really, where, yeah, you just kind of reflect on where you are in your life, not in a real kind of life coaching, you set your goals, kind
yeah.
of stressy sort of way. Just a gentle checking in about, how am I doing? Am I kind of where I want to be? And it's where I've had all my creative ideas about, I run a Wild Blue School with coastal education here. I do a kids well-being program. Uh, it's where I get my kind of writing ideas from. It's not in the everyday humdrum where you're, you know, wondering what's for dinner, or are the bins going out today, or that ticker tape of lists and jobs, because you can't kind of reflect and think very effectively when you're in that hamster wheel. So I'm a really big advocate and fan of just taking a little retreat, and it doesn't have to be formal or structured. It can be whatever you need. There's some amazing retreat centres out there, having said that, in Ireland, the UK, all over Europe. And for me, I obviously have to have water involved for it to be a proper rest or a proper break,
Yeah.
Otherwise it doesn't count. It's like going on holiday. It's impossible for me to book inland, or if I go inland, it has to be near a lake or something,
Yeah.
I visited a friend in Switzerland recently, and it's very beautiful, but I just thought, oh my God, oh, how can you live here? There's no edge. I need to, as soon as I got back, I was like nearly almost as if I was wearing like a straitjacket. I had to just go down to the coast and breathe and look at the sky and the horizon. And there, that's better. So,
Is there like, when you look at the retreat and you're kind of breaking routine or breaking pattern a small bit, is it mostly for the creative side of things, and do you feel, or is there that mindfulness benefit to it as well, where you are?
Oh, it's really about mindfulness. If you
Okay.
start putting pressure on yourself to be creative, now I have to go here so I can do this, that defeats the whole purpose.
Yeah.
You take a break and you retreat to just be, and you see what comes up for you. The one way that I sort of encourage that is to just bring the same journal that I've brought for the last 10 years. It's quite, I only, as I say, it's 3 times a year. I do it every 3-4 months. But I go to the same place and I have my little rituals so that I don't have to think about it. I don't have to go, oh, I wonder, is that a nice place? Or I wonder what there is to do there. Because it's not really a holiday. It's a little break. So I really recommend doing that. And it's, the ritual of just switching off and acknowledging that you're not in charge of anybody, and you can spend the next 24 hours exactly how you want, and you don't have to negotiate, meals or restaurant choices. You can have a bag of crisps on the beach if you want.
Yeah.
Or whatever, and nobody's going to judge you. I usually end up having like 2 or 3 swims, about 4 baths, bit of like naff telly, glass of wine if I'm in that sort of mood. I may not, depending if I'm on kind of downtime. But yeah, it's just very, very, very peaceful and very restful if you've got a busy life with lots of responsibilities and you're old things to old people, which so many of us seem to be. It's just hitting the pause. And so many people, especially I think juggling parents, don't give themselves permission to do that. And then everybody gets a bit stressed and fighty and having sort of tiredness competitions to see who's the most hard done by, and then taking it out on each other, which is not helpful. So it's kind of, just go before you need it, before you reach that point. It's like filling the car with petrol before you've run out. It's the same principle. It just helps the wheels turn smoothly.
What's up, guys? Robbie here. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I just wanted to take a quick moment to ask for your help. Could you please take a minute to leave us a rating on whatever you're listening to this right now? The ratings and reviews mean the world to us, and they help us to understand what you love about the show, as well as what we can improve on. Plus, it does actually help us reach even more listeners again. Thank you so much for your support so far, and we are getting straight back into it right now. Good way of looking at it. That's it, yeah. Is there, I guess...
It just came out of me now. That was quite a good one.
Yeah, write that down. I was going to say, do you have because you bring the same journal, then do you have a certain set? Because for me, I love to journal. I probably don't do it as consistently as I should, definitely not. But I often, with people that I work with, I promote journaling. But a lot of times people struggle to where to start when they're journaling. Do you have
Yeah,
certain
well,
questions?
I don't journal in my everyday life because I'm too busy. And I write, and I'm always writing lectures and writing papers and writing stuff. So for me, everyday writing is kind of work. Um, so yeah, I have a nice journal with some birds on the front of it that I bring, and I usually just start by I look back to see when was I there last, and then I'll see the date, and I'll kind of read back over what I had written when I was there the last time. And it might be I usually start with maybe just free form account of what's gone on in the last little while. So for me, it's usually every 3 or 4 months because I do it regularly. But if it's your first time, you might just want to reflect on the last few months, and I'll just talk about, say, oh, this happened, that happened, whatever's going on with family, work, life, whatever's happening. I just do a little kind of blurting out of if I've been anywhere, done anything interesting, anything like that. And then I'll put 4 or 5 little subheadings down, just to check in with myself. And those might be around work. So I was in a job for quite a long time that I wasn't that happy in for the last few years of it. And I was, that John O'Donoghue, lovely writing about the, what does he call it now? He's a lovely turn of phrase with that. The greyness that safety promises, which is, really not living your best life, but you kind of know it and it's safe and familiar. But
A comfortable life.
until you're ready to strive out into new pastures. So I would check in with work, and that's sort of what's going on with work. Am I enjoying it? Is it nice? Da, da, da. Am I still like complaining about the same stuff that's bothering me? So just kind of reflecting on where you are in your work life, and then maybe family, which could be if you have children or partners yourself, or it could be extended family if you're looking after people, elderly or relatives or whatever. So what's going on with family, could be relationship, health and well-being. That one always doesn't get as much attention for me as it should, and it goes up and down a lot. And then I have something kind of called, I might have something on writing, but I might have something called life purpose, which sounds a bit hippie, but I want to make sure that I honor that as well, that it's not just kind of how's everybody else and how's my career going, because my career is very much blurred in with my sense of life purpose. And it relates back to, my mum's sudden and young death as well. I think I've always carried that with me, the concept of meaningful work and doing stuff that matters to you. And I'm lucky in that I've sort of gradually meandered towards a place where that's all sort of coming together. And it wasn't kind of sudden or recent. It was a slow meandering river that's brought me to this point, but I'm quite conscious of it, and I'm really, So those are kind of the headings that I usually do, and I might write a few lines under each of those, and then I might set myself 4 or 5 little things that I might want to look at for the next time I'm here, and it might be something really practical, like I always found in the early years in particular, where I was trying to figure out what on earth am I doing? I wasn't happy in doing this, but I wanted to do something else, but what would it be? And if I wasn't sure what that was, I would always book a course or a little bit of learning, or not even a retreat, but it would be something that would involve learning. So I did like some beach school training, or I did a mindfulness diploma, or I did something. And that just kind of keeps the energy moving in the right direction of growth, rather than, sitting at home on the sofa complaining about your life, thinking it's terrible, but not kind of doing anything about it.
Yeah.
But equally not mega kind of, as I say, coachy goal setting. Just a little nudge to yourself. And I think we all have that little kind of inner voice that knows very well when we're not happy in something, but is maybe too scared to step out of it. And doing a little bit of training, or meeting other people and hearing different viewpoints, or listening to somebody giving a course, often can just inspire you. And sometimes it'll just be a throwaway comment. I remember when I was doing my mindfulness teacher training years ago, and bear in mind, I have a science degree, a PhD, and a BSc in stress management. And I was thinking, gosh, I don't really feel qualified to go out and do this. And the woman just laughed and she said, Catherine, I think you need to get out of your own way. And it was that comment that just tipped me over into going, yeah, bloody hell, you're right.
And
And that's what made me move from being just an academic. And I never wanted to be an academic who just wrote clever papers about things and didn't kind of walk the walk. But the momentum for stepping out into practice came from that kind of a comment, which came from going on a course, which came from a little retreat where I was quiet with myself, thinking about, okay, how do I move from the observer and the researcher to the practitioner? So, yeah.
it is yeah, it's a great way of looking at it, I think, especially having the set times where you are every 3 months and you're kind of stepping out of the, or is it 3 months or 4 months, say?
3 to 4 months, depending on kind of how busy things are. But yeah, I tend to go, yeah, at least 3 times 4 if I can get it. Roughly every, yeah.
Would you say then that the times that you get down to the sea, or the times that you, like in between those, do you have mini retreats? Like how do you give yourself some space in those times?
Yeah, well, that is, I mean, when I go to the sea, and it depends on what you need, doesn't it? I'm a member of a lovely sea swimming community here called the Salty Seabirds in Brighton, and I've met some lovely friends through that. And in winter, when the seas are rough and a bit spicy and cold, it's better to be in the water with people, just in case you come a cropper for any reason. And winter, this time of the year can be long and cold and dark for people, so a bit of social well-being is really important for our mood and spirit. And even if the last thing you feel like is talking to somebody, if you're feeling a bit down, if you can make yourself go out, you will feel better. So I get, if I'm in that kind of that mood where a bit of social interaction is good in the water, then I'll meet up with some of my seabirds. But often, yeah, for me, I have a very busy life. I've got 2 kids, a job, a dog, writing commitments, research commitments. I lecture, I do lots of kind of media stuff, and yeah, it's pretty full on. So often I like to get in the sea on my own, just to be really quiet. And even if I don't have much time, I'm lucky it's the kind of 5-minute walk from my house. But if I have like 20 minutes or half an hour in between things, sometimes I'll just literally put on my swimsuit and lash down the road. And I might just get into the sea, and I might just go shoulder depth and just dunk and immerse, go down, like an anchor, breathing mindfully and intentionally, and then come back up again really slowly and take another few breaths and just do 3 or 4 immersions on the spot, really slowly and just intentionally letting the cold water take all the busyness out of me. And breathe again and let go if there's anything really bothering me as well. Just do that really mindfully with each one. And then I come out and I'm like, oh, grand, I'm good now, good to go.
Yeah, it is. Is it looking at I wanted to kind of dive into maybe the sciencey part of it a small bit, and looking at the physiological as well as the psychological benefits. I know you mentioned there the social benefits of getting in there with people, is obviously there's the community, that side of things.
Yeah, I mean, there's three main well-being impacts that research points to of being in or near blue spaces, which is the physical benefits, which are obviously mainly to do with exercise. So cardiovascular health through walking, running, next to swimming, in surfing on, etc. So that really improves our cardiovascular fitness. It's also really good for weight bearing if you have joint issues or, are of a different shape or size that you find exercising on land difficult for any reason. So that's really important. And it's good for our skin. The sodium is good for our skin. It's good for eczema. And cold water is good for arthritis and inflammatory conditions as well. So all those, and there's a kind of a blurred boundary, I would say, between all three of these areas of well-being, because we get into the psychological well-being impacts then, and we talk about, breathing. Now, breathing is obviously a physical activity, but breathing also calms our mind. So, which is why meditation works so well, because our breath is slowed down and we become aware of ourselves, and we're, intentionally cutting off the neural pathway to the panic center of our amygdala in our brain. So it's encouraging our parasympathetic nervous system to work, and water, as we discussed earlier, does that for us. We don't have to concentrate hard on our breathing, or breathing properly, inverted commas, because the water does that for us, and we do it really naturally when we're in it or beside it. So the psychological benefits are really good. Also, research is starting to show the relationship between water and hormonal regulations, so adrenaline and cortisol levels dropping, all the stress hormones. So the body-mind relationship is really strong when we're in and near water. It really, one really supports the other. There's also research coming out, and again, the research, with my research scientist hat on here, the research is a mix of qualitative and quantitative. I'm a qualitative researcher, so for me, if thousands of people come to me in a big sample and say, this makes me feel good, then that's okay for me. A quantitative researcher will want to know, how often do I have to go in? How long do I have to go for? How many repetitions do I need? What's the duration? What's the temperature? Is it my whole body? Is it just my elbow? Do I have to go up to, really specific? And I work with physiologists, Heather Massey, for example, in the University of Portsmouth, who's a physiologist, and she works in the Cold Water Research Centre there, where they do work with the Navy, for example. So they have to know that if, 5 guys fall out of a ship in the Arctic, how long they're going to live for. They can survive before they need to be rescued. So then it is really about how cold, how long, whatever. So some of the research on this is coming from different places, but it's really useful. So we have to use words like suggest that, and is beginning to show, and that sort of mixed methods approach, which I think is really important. Not to be making kind of grand claims. That's not my business as an academic to, I'm very careful in my choice of words about that. But the research is starting to suggest that anti-inflammatory properties, for example, of cold water in particular, are really associated with improved well-being. So, and an awful lot of our modern diseases are now starting to be shown to be related to inflammation. So all the digestive disorders, skin disorders, menopause stuff as well, and arthritic conditions, and so on. So if cold water helps to stimulate the parts of the bodies that deal with inflammation, we could be onto something really interesting. And where we're at now is trying to get funding organizations to fund research on this, so that we can do the studies, so that we can create the mix of evidence. I was telling you off microphone before we started, I spoke at the House of Lords in Parliament last week in the UK, where Lord Bethel has set up an all-party parliamentary group looking at outdoor swimming for social prescribing. So yeah, I was there with other people so to try and make the case for where the research is at now, where it needs to go. And I think in 10, 15 years' time, it's going to be really interesting that we'll have so much more evidence, because there's a wave of interest behind this. And you know what? It's not just people getting in the sea for a bit of a laugh or whatever. It is really helping people's physical and mental health massively. So we need to kind of back it up now so it can be taken more seriously. And over here they're talking about, so this parliamentary group was to look at outdoor swimming in particular for social prescribing, which means that, if you're in the right category of person, that you could go to your GP and they would say, don't have these tablets. Why don't you try the 6-week program? It's starting next month and we've got 6 funded spaces.
Yeah.
And the providers we've selected are in a framework where they've met a certain set of criteria. And we feel that you meet the criteria of this program. So that's what I was talking about in Parliament last week, was looking at the spectrum of provision out there and the spectrum of need. Somebody who's with low well-being that we all suffer from time to time, low mood, stress, overwork, overwhelm, exhaustion, fatigue, menopause, whatever it might be. That's in that category. And that's really different if imagine me drawing a line with my fingers on the radio now or on the podcast, is that's one end of my line. The other end of my line is people with, serious mental illness.
Okay.
And we're not saying that getting in the sea is going to cure you of something on that spectrum. So I want to be really careful about, well-being and usage and what have you, because there's a spectrum of need amongst those of us who choose to use the water. And there's also a spectrum of provision. There's lots of self-regulating groups on Facebook and social media, the dippers and the bobbers and all the lovely names that we hear of all the groups that are really happy to just manage themselves. And then at the other end of the spectrum, again, with my little imaginary line, you have people who are properly trained open water coaches. Who are specifically trained to show people how to get in and out of the sea safely, or how to increase their stamina, or how to overcome fear of water, and all the specific training that goes with that.
Yeah, that's it. I was going to say, you mentioned there about like the inflammatory causes and how it can decrease inflammation. And you also, I know you also were saying that like you can have an effect on arthritis. It can have an effect on different conditions like that. From my perspective, it's interesting, because a lot of the people who, when you look at arthritis and you look at these long-term chronic conditions, it's their pain is regulated as well, obviously, by the nervous system and an overactivation of the nervous system in a lot of cases. And a lot of the time we're just looking at strategies to try to decrease the activation of it, or to turn it down, as you mentioned there about turning up parasympathetic tone. It's a big one. I know you also mentioned before about when you were in Westport, and that you were saying it really helped you with the dealing with grief, and to, I guess, help you to get over the death of your mother. Not that you would ever get over it fully, but in terms of it did help with that healing side of things. How does the cold water, or how does mindfulness facilitate the emotional healing? Is it?
Yeah, it stops I think people, again, it's this, it's really important, I think, to look at time frames and spectrums to qualify everyone's different experience. Somebody who's in sudden shock or whatever is in a different place to somebody who's maybe in early to mid stages of grief or healing. It could be bereavement, it could be whatever is going on for some people it's divorce, or some people it's loss of a job, or whatever it might be. Wherever you are with that depends on how raw you're feeling. And getting in the water just allows you to switch off the mental processing of it. So that's what it's about. Is often we're very consumed by those kinds of extreme tragedies, and I guess for some people they're numbed by it, and then the other response is you're overwhelmed by it. So we either avoid or approach
Yeah.
difficult things in our responses to trauma in life, whatever it might be. We pretend it isn't happening, so we numb ourselves. And we can just numb ourselves emotionally by trying not to think about it, or we can numb ourselves by using substances like alcohol, drugs, food, whatever it might be. So that's a common avoidant numbing strategy. And the other one is like overwhelm, where we can't stop thinking about it and it takes over every living thought, every conversation we have, every action we take in our day is colored by this situation, this trauma, this event. And those are the sort of the two extremes to coping with those kind of things in life. So when we get into the water, it just allows those things to switch off. The overwhelm dissolves and the numbing thaws,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it just allows us to come back to ourselves a little bit again, I think, you know, not the numbness of I can't feel anything, or not the overwhelm of I'm feeling too much.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good answer. And I heard you mention as
That
well.
was a good answer.
Yeah.
Just came to
Is
me
there,
there.
yeah.
You told me you would show me the questions first. I'm like, no, I really don't. I'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. That's the thing. I might do that more often now.
Yeah.
But I heard you mention a couple of times as well through the podcast that intention is really important, and I'm conscious of the time as well, so I don't want to hold you too much longer. But
Yeah. No, it's fine.
I want to kind of get a few strategies that people can put in place so they can start to, I guess, implement these themselves. Is intention that important when you're going into the water? If it's for the emotional side of things, if it's for the physical side of things, should you be setting that intention, or should you be going in freely?
I think if there's something really bothering you, you know, um, I think for numbness and avoidance, you can't really set intention because you're not in that space. But that's where the water can just kind of creep up on you and start dissolving you a little bit
Yeah.
in a nice, gentle, non-striving way. But I think if you're feeling really overwhelmed and consumed by something, whether it's grief or your boss at work who's annoying you, or your partner, your friend, your kids, whatever it might be, that overwhelm of, oh my God, I wish everybody would leave me alone, or I wish this was different, or I wish this hadn't happened, whatever. That is a mindful exercise I have in the book, is where you walk into the water and you intentionally let go of something that's really upsetting you. And it's usually something that we can't change. That's the tricky thing, which is why we drive ourselves crazy. Because if we could change it, we would. But instead we have to live with it, and we don't want to live with it. But we have to. So the water allows us to find some peace in that, or just to dilute the effect of it, literally, by giving ourselves or the situation or the pain or the worry or the frustration over into the water and allowing it to take it away from us. And the Japanese have that lovely phrase called living water, which is, it's not just, it's this reciprocal relationship where we pour something of ourselves into the water, but it in return takes something from us.
Yeah.
So it's this almost like a little contract or a little negotiation where you go in to just, be together in it. And I'm a big, one of my research areas, I'm literally, before you called, I was here writing a grant application for a local charity that does environmental conservation work on the beach. And I really think that, the places that make us feel well, that we have a real moral obligation to look after them as they look after us. And that's that kind of symbiosis as well of, care.
Yeah.
Care for ourselves and care for the water. And care is a lovely soft word that I think doesn't get used enough, I'll write that down. I'm coming up with all nice things here talking to you this evening.
Is does quality of the water matter in terms of, like, is there a difference between going to a swimming pool versus a
Oh, I thought you were going to say a polluted sewage
Yeah,
outlet
I was gonna.
versus the
A slow
source of the Alps. Um, the jury's out on that. It's really personal. You can't,
Yeah,
that's kind of saying, is cheese nice? Well, some people like it, some people
yeah,
don't. Some like it strong, some like it mild, some like it, whatever. Um, if you're living in a place where you can't get to outdoor natural water, then, having a swim in the pool and getting into the water is great. I personally don't like indoor swimming pools. They make me really claustrophobic. Chlorine stings my eyes, and I get really stressed wondering if I'm going the right speed in the lane.
yeah.
Am I going too fast? Am I going to stress out the person in front of me? Am I going too slow?
Exact opposite
Is that guy
effect.
catching up on me? And that to me is not, uh, a peaceful experience.
Yeah,
So it depends. We're all different. I'm kind of get me out in the wilds on my own and float on my back looking up at the sky. I never understand people who wear like neoprene hats, goggles, and swim in the sea for miles with their face down. I just think, but you can't see the surface or the sky, and why would you do that? But I realize I'm probably in the minority there. It's just
yeah.
like,
It,
I like looking at it. Yeah.
and for those like this is actually more like this is a selfish question because Buenos Aires, where I am at the moment, there's no real connections. You definitely wouldn't go into the estuary for sure.
No, no, I've been to Buenos Aires. My
Definitely wouldn't.
famous opening moment in Buenos Aires was walking into a glass door an hour after
Oh
I landed and breaking my nose. Yeah, it was
no.
good.
Yeah. So you probably have a
Yeah.
tainted version of the city, I can imagine after that.
No, 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 it was still lovely. I wasn't quite able to partake in chewy steak the first night.
Yeah,
Couldn't
that's
move my face. Yeah. No, no, the water there is quite brackish and murky, isn't it?
yeah.
And
Oh,
the river is probably not, yeah, of the highest water quality.
I
So,
wouldn't be, yeah, I wouldn't be suggesting, and people have told me don't go anywhere near it. So I said, okay, I'll stay out. I might go north and south. I might go down to Patagonia or one of those places. But
mm,
while
yeah.
in the city, what other options is there then? Is it to,
Well, it's fountains, and if I mean you can walk next to the river and still
yeah,
enjoy some of the sensory aspects of it if you focus on one element of it, like motion,
yeah, oh yeah, okay,
and see how fast it's moving, or what's growing around it, what plants are there, and what people are doing along the riverside is kind of a nice little noticing exercise, um, as well. So.
okay,
Yeah, I think again, fountains. I lots of people, when I was doing the research for the book, lots of people were talking to me about, how they always have to have their lunch in London next to this one fountain because the sound of the water makes them just feel happy and that they're not trapped
hmm.
in the city. Um, so yeah, those are things, and noticing the water in your own home as well. It's as I said, it's a huge dollop of gratitude to be able to pour yourself a glass of cold, fresh, clean water.
Yeah,
Um, and that, water is going to be the liquid gold of the future. I'm pretty guaranteed because there'll come a point where we ruin our water supplies so much that, we're going to be in trouble if we don't sort of catch on a little bit. So you can be very present with your blue space gratitude in pouring a glass of water or pressing a button and turning on a nice shower over your head
yeah,
or filling a bath to immerse yourself in. It's the small stuff if you're away from the big stuff,
yeah,
that can keep you connected to it. And memories. I write a lot about, you know, imagination and memory for our well-being. If you close your eyes this minute and imagine your favorite beach holiday ever, or your best wave, or your loveliest sunset by the water, I bet you can think of something. And you probably smile. I see you smiling here as you're doing that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I can think
So
of
we
many of them.
have, yeah.
Yeah,
So we have an emotional response. And when we smile and laugh through our memory, it invokes a feeling of well-being in us. So, and remember lockdown when we couldn't go anywhere. I was certainly reliving my last trip, to the sea, and in every detail, and savoring the memory of it, and looking back over old photos or social media posts going, oh gosh, yeah,
Look what I had.
wistfully.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, but also kind of grateful that you had it to look back on,
Yeah, that's true as well, yeah.
And making the most of what we have, because we all choose to live our lives different order and different ways. And I had my kids a bit later, so I think of all the lovely round the world trips and adventures and escapades I had before them, and others are looking forward to what's ahead once they're more free. And you know what I mean, memory and anticipation backwards and forwards when we're not able to be in present moment. Blue space is a good substitute.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the perfect place to leave it for now. Thanks a million for jumping on.
My pleasure.
I think that was the idea of one of the biggest takeaways that I took from that was the idea of when you can't get into it, to start to observe what's around it, start to observe smell and the feeling of it, and what's growing.
Landscape.
The sensory landscape. That's something that I wouldn't have ever considered as much before. But I guess before we leave, where can people find you?
Only on Instagram. My publishers tell me off for not being on everything, but honestly,
who has the time?
Twitter I find is too fighty, and I'm too old for Snapchat and TikTok. So Instagram I am on, which is at Blue Spaces, all one word, _UK, Blue Spaces UK. And yeah, that's where my social media presence is. If you're interested in academic aspects and so on, you'll find me under the University of Brighton in the UK as well.
Very nice. And the book is Blue Spaces, How and Why Water
Can Make You Feel Better. Available for all usual book selling places, platforms, bookshops, etc. And I'm trying to get around to writing my next one. The publisher emailing me every week.
Very nice.
Wave of guilt just came over me there, saying that.
Am I able to ask her what it's about, or is it too early?
Yeah, no, I'm playing around with some ideas. I'm sort of a hybrid, so I'm loath to kind of box myself into one genre. I like a little bit of it. Lots of people liked Blue Spaces because they said it felt like I was just having a chat with them. And that's how I tried to write it, which for me was lovely, because academic writing can be very stultifying, so it was a real relief to be able to just write in my own voice. So I want to do that again. And I'm thinking of doing something around water across the life cycle, and looking at how we engage with it at different parts of our lives. And I want to, and different scenarios and situations around joy or grief or change or whatever it might be, and just inserting some little kind of written meditations with a little bit of explanatory science behind them, what's going on with our bodies and brains with these certain situations, but kind of linked through the theme of the life cycle of water.
Yeah, very nice. Looking forward to it. But thank you so much for jumping on. And
Pleasure.
Thank you guys for listening. We will chat to you all again next week. Have a good one.
Thanks, Rory.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're looking to learn more about what we do, as well as check out any of the mobility and pre-op programs we have available, just head over to the description of this podcast and you will find a link to all the programs there. As always, thank you for listening, and I will chat to you all again in the next episode. Have a good one.